Namaste, can you guys hear me? All right. So we're going to do a very small but very important topic today, the six rasas in Ayurveda. So you would have actually, already kind of heard about the six rasas and what they mean. So basically, rasa is something that is perceived by the tongue, right? Rasa is something that you taste. So the word is split into two, ra and sa. So ra means to taste, and sa is just basically the juice or or a secretion. So rasa is something that is perceived clearly by the tongue. So in Ayurveda, it is believed that there are six rasas, and each of these rasas are important because they have gunas or qualities, and they are created by combinations of different elements. And the most important thing is these rasas kind of create a balance or an imbalance in the dosha state that is there in the body. Now, um, we've we're going to learn about each rasa, about what each rasa does, and about how you can you can kind of play around with the permutations and combinations of these rasas to create herbs and to create a balance of the doshas. Ideally, you need to consume all these six rasas to have a very balanced diet, to have a very healthy diet. Okay, so now let's. So each rasa is made up of a combination of the elements that are present, right? So the first rasa, being the sweet rasa, is a combination of earth and water. Now, the qualities, the characteristics of this rasa is directly based on the characteristics of these two elements. Now, earth is something that is heavy, that is dull, that is dense, that is hard, right? And water is something that is soft, liquid, that is dull, that is slimy. So the sweet rasa would have characteristics that would be a combination of these two elements put together. Does that make sense? So look at sour. Now this rasa sour is made up of earth and fire elements. Now earth, like we already saw, is heavy, is dull, is hard, is dense, and fire has that heat, has that sharpness, has that dryness, that lightness to it. So the sour taste, the characteristics, the qualities that we look in sour taste would be a combination of these two elements put together. Salty taste is made up of water and fire elements. So water would be liquid, would be soft, would be dull, would be cool, and fire would have that heat, would have that sharpness, dryness, lightness. Pungent is made up of fire and air. Fire, we've already seen the characteristics. Air is again dry, light, cold, and very subtle. Astringent is made up of air and earth, so it would have a combination of the qualities that you see in air element as well as in earth element. And finally, bitter taste is made up of air and space. Now space is clear, light, and subtle, and air is again dry, light, cold, and subtle. So what these rasas do to the body, what it does to the dosha, is actually because of the qualities of these elements that you've seen, right? So now we look at what each rasa does to the doshas. Does this make sense? Does the whole quality, the gunas of rasas based on the mahabhutas, does it make a little sense? Now I think if we look at the doshas, it'll be a little more clear. So naturally sweet rasa. Now the reason that sweet, sour, and salty, you have to actually you have to actually specify that you're talking about a naturally sweet, a naturally sour, and a naturally salty dravya, because if you use a pickled, say for instance, if I've pickled carrots, I've poured in some salt and vinegar in carrot, and I've pickled carrot, I've actually kind of altered the rasa over there. So my the carrots, the pickled carrots have a different taste. So the gunas, what it does, the effect, everything is completely different. It's not what the natural vegetable would do, right? So a naturally sweet dravya is made up of water and earth um, elements, and vata and pitta is balanced with a naturally sweet rasa, and kapha is aggravated because the mahabhutas, water and earth, and the gunas that these two mahabhutas, these two elements have, is the same as the kapha dosha. So if you have too much of kapha dosha, it would increase your if you have too much of sweet madhura rasa, it would increase your kapha dosha. A naturally sour rasa is made up of earth and fire. Now, the heat of this fire and the properties, the heaviness of earth, the density that earth has, would balance the vata dosha, and it would increase the kapha and the pitta doshas. Now, a naturally salty rasa is made up of fire and water element, and this would balance the vata dosha but increase the pitta and kapha dosha. Okay, a pungent rasa is made up of fire and air element, so this would balance the kapha dosha but would increase the vata and the pitta dosha. Now if you actually learn the if so when we learn Ayurveda, when we learn these rasas, just so that we can understand it easily, there's a very easy shloka that we learn, which obviously I'm not going to tell you the shloka, but a very easy way of learning this is, if you just remember these these rasas in an order, like if you remember sweet, salty, sour, pungent, astringent, and bitter, if you remember it in an order, then it becomes easier to learn, because the first three rasas increase kapha and balances vata. The last three rasas increase vata and reduces your kapha, balances the kapha. So you're just basically you just have to remember what the pitta balancing rasas are. So if you remember that sweet, astringent and bitter rasas balance your pitta, then you kind of it's easier to remember that way. So you don't have to by heart, or you don't have to or you don't have to make an effort to remember what aggravates vata and kapha, because they're just complete opposites. Whatever balances vata, the rasas, I'm talking about the whatever I say today is very specific to the rasas. Okay, so whatever balances vata would increase your kapha, and whatever balances kapha would increase your vata. So that's easy to remember. You just have to learn what balances pitta, and it becomes easier to remember, right? So that's a little trick you can think of when you're learning the rasas. So the astringent taste, which is made up of air and earth, would increase vata dosha, and it would balance the pitta and kapha. And similarly, bitter taste would balance pitta and kapha and increase the vata dosha. Now, another important thing over here is, if you have a client who has an aggravated single dosha, like say you have a client who has diabetes, who has prameha. Diabetes is a condition which we learn as prameha in Ayurveda. So if the person has this problem, it would naturally mean this particular disease is a very kapha predominant condition, right? So a person comes to you with a kapha condition, and if the person is a kapha prakriti and a kapha vikriti, if it's a single dosha, it becomes very easy for you to treat, because all you have to do is balance that one dosha. But if a person comes to you with a combination of doshas, if a person comes to you with a vata and pitta dosha, then you have to, give that person sweet rasa, so that it would balance both the vata and the pitta that is aggravated. Or if a person comes to you with a pitta and a kapha dosha, then you can give them a combination of an astringent or a bitter rasa. Do you get me? So you need to know what will pacify it, because if a person comes to you with a combination of doshas, and you give them, say a person comes to you with vata and pitta, and you give them a lot of sour or salty food, thinking that that would balance the vata. Yes, it would balance the vata in the person, but it would increase the pitta, right? So you need to give something that will balance both the doshas, and so it becomes important to know what rasa can be used in that particular condition. So just going by these rasas, if a person came to you with vata and kapha, what would you probably do? Any idea? Now that I've told you, if a person comes with vata and pitta, this is what you do, and with pitta and kapha, this is the rasa that you do. If somebody comes to you with vata and kapha, just complete opposite doshas, what would you do? Anybody? Oh no, we don't want to do that. Right. So if someone comes with a vata and a kapha combination, then you have to, with in terms of rasa, there's not much that you can do. So you probably have to examine the nadi and see. Yes, that's one way of going with it. So you examine the nadi and see which one is more imbalanced, and then you give something for that. So then you will have to look at the nature of that person. So if the person is naturally a vata person, and if that vata has aggravated, then you would, go and you would reduce the vata first, and then do something for the kapha. But apart from that, always remember that a person who has vata and kapha, this is the only treatment that will work. You have to give them something, you have to apply heat, give them something that is hot, that has ushnatvam. So some form of heat application, it can be steam, or some form of heat application. And the same thing goes for your for the kind of treatment that you would give. But in terms of your rasa, what you would do is you would give something that would, you would probably stick to something that has a little bit of fire element, fire mahabhuta in it, and you give a combination. So that, like for instance, you give a combination of either something that is sour and pungent, or you give a combination of something that's salty and pungent, so that little bit of fire that is there in that rasa would work on both vata and kapha, and because it's a combination, it will balance it out. Does this make sense? Yeah. All right. So now some examples. So sweet rasa that is naturally sweet, like we already saw, it is earth and water, and it would increase your kapha, but it will balance your vata and your pitta. So basically what this sweet rasa does is it improves your strength, right? Because there's more kapha coming in, right? So it increases your strength. It is basically good for your complexion, basically good for your hair. It would even increase the ojas, which is ultimately what you want, the essence of all the dhatus, right? So that is what madhura rasa or sweet rasa does. But if you have too much of madhura, if you have a lot of sweet, then it increases the kapha a lot, and then that would in turn lead to obesity. That would in turn lead to kaphaja vikaras, would lead to tumors, would lead to asthma, would lead to respiratory conditions, and so on, because there's a lot of kapha that is accumulating. Now, if you want to give some natural food that is sweet. Say a person with vata and pitta vikara comes to you and you want to give them something that would increase the kapha to balance the other two out, then you would give them things like grains. Most of the natural fruits are sweet, and that sweet that is there in these fruits is a form of indirect sugar, wherein you're not really giving them refined sugar or any form of sugar, but you're giving them a very indirect sugar. So you would give them fruits, milk, dates, carrots, beets, and things like that that would increase the that are naturally sweet. You can give them ghee, you can give them grapes, licorice, ripe bananas, and so on. There are a lot of different kinds of food that you can choose from and give a person if you want to increase the madhura rasa in the food intake. Now for salty food. So salty food, again, this is naturally salty food. So when we talk about salty food, we're not talking about pickles with salt that's a preservative, or we're not even talking about most of these canned food and most of these packaged foods, because that has a lot of salt. Even though you don't really taste it, it has a lot of salt in it, right? So natural salts, sea vegetables, seaweed, mineral water, all these are examples of food that have natural salty rasa in them. Excess intake of food that has salt in it, like chips, canned food, food that basically stays in your pantry endlessly, has a really long shelf life. All these are bad for your health. All these cause lifestyle disorders. They have, your metabolism becomes bad. You have metabolic disorders. You have obesity. You have diabetes and whatnot, right? Heart problems, high blood pressure, and all of that. So if you need to increase the salt, you need to increase that little bit of salty rasa in a person. um, Suggest something like a natural salt, like rock salt, like the Saindava salt that you get, and so on. Or the best option would be to incorporate that in your herb, in terms of what herb you prescribe, right? The next, so yeah, basically what the salty rasa does is, it if there is some kind of an obstruction in your pores, if there is some kind of obstruction in your channels, the salty rasa goes in there and it clears that obstruction. It increases digestion, it increases your sweating. So if for people who have who don't sweat or who have clogged pores, then the salty rasa would help. It improves the taste. So that's the reason when you eat food and if there's no salt in it, you basically don't have taste, right? So it increases the taste. And if you have too much of salt, then there's vata vitiation, pitta vitiation. So we're talking about salt, right? So yeah, and then you have, it would lead to a lot of, it would lead to blood pressure, it would lead to graying of hair, loss of hair, it would lead to wrinkles and, signs of aging if you have too much of salty food, right? And another important thing is, if you have a client who has a skin disorder, you have to tell them to control the amount of salt that they eat, because that would actually worsen the skin disorder. Salt, as well as the next rasa, which is sour, you have to tell them to control the intake of sour rasa also. Both that would be like an apatyam for a person who has a skin disorder. Now this sour rasa is good for the digestive fire. It increases the digestive fire. It pacifies your vata, but it increases pitta and kapha. And then excess, it would increase your pitta a lot because of that fire element that it has. And it's basically very good for the heart. And there are these foods that you call hridya in Ayurveda, means food that is very satisfying and food that, basically gives you that sense of satisfaction after you're done with your food. So sour is one of those. right? Actually speaking, sweet, salty, and sour rasas would be hridya food, but sour all the more. It's hridya food, very pleasing to the mind. And if you look at it, all these things that are pleasing to the stomach, to your tongue, which are like extremely tasty and which kind of increases that satisfaction that you have, they increase your kapha dosha. They lead to lifestyle disorders, obesity, and whatnot. So apart from that, this so amla rasa is good for the heart, like I was telling you. But if you have too much of amla rasa, if you have too much of it, then that would lead to looseness of the body, loss of strength. It would lead to itching. It would lead to a kind of pallor and swelling and thirst and so on. Now, examples of this sour rasa would be citrus fruits like your lemons, oranges, all your fermented food, yogurt, gooseberry, tamarind, and buttermilk that is made with sour yogurt and so on. The next is astringent rasa. So astringent rasa is basically your air and earth. It's called Kashaya Rasa in Ayurveda. And this astringent rasa is not easily digested. It helps cleansing the blood. It causes sneezing. It heals ulcers. It causes constipation. And if you have too much of astringent rasa, that would increase your vata and it would pacify your pitta and kapha doshas. Now, examples of astringent rasas would be legumes, pomegranate, dry bananas, or raw bananas, plantains, raw food, fruits and vegetables, lotus stalk, and so on. Those are some examples of astringent rasa dravyas. Now, if you have too much of astringent rasa, it would cause flatulence because it increases your vata. There's a lot of air, so that would cause flatulence. There would be pain in the heart. There would be a lot of thirst, emaciation. There'll be obstruction to these channels, and there would even be obstruction to your in the colon, leading to constipation and so on. Generally, when there's a lot of vata, if you examine the nadi and there's a lot of vata, then the person has a problem with their with the stools. There's a good chance that the stools are dry and hard and constipated, right? So the next thing is pungent rasa. Now, pungent rasa is called katu rasa. It's made of the two main elements are fire and earth. So this pungent rasa increases vata and pitta, and it balances out the kapha, and it basically causes your diseases of the throat. So if a person is prone to a lot of allergies, allergic rashes, or throat problems or skin problems, then you avoid pungent rasa again. It leads to it's a little it basically increases your digestion. It increases hunger. So if a person has a loss of appetite and is not hungry easily, then this pungent rasa would help. It has a lot of cleansing properties. So when we do the panchakarmas, or when we're doing cleansing, we use herbs and drugs that have this pungent rasa to help in the whole process of shodhana. And another thing that it does is it dilates the channels, these pungent rasa dravyas. So if you have too much of pungent rasa, it would lead to thirst, loss of strength. It would lead to a depletion of the shukra dhatu, or the sperm, and it can cause it can cause fainting, blackouts, and tremors, and so on. So foods that have pungent rasa would be onions, cayenne pepper, raw garlic, mustard oil, asafoetida, black pepper. All that has pungent rasa. Now, the last rasa is your bitter rasa. Bitter rasa is called tikta rasa, and this rasa is made up of air and space, mahabhutas, and it increases vata and balances pitta and kapha. Now, This rasa cures anorexia. In case of worm infestation, you give something that's bitter, like neem. Right, neem is the most classic example of a bitter rasa. And if there's worms, or if you have skin disorders, or if you have you have fever, thirst, all that, these bitter rasas would help in all those conditions. So normally, when someone comes to you with a skin problem, the most important thing that you have to remember is most of your most of the what do you say um, herbs that you prescribe for skin conditions would be bitter rasas, would be would be herbs that have a bitter rasa, right? And examples of these are neem, bitter gourd, sandalwood, dark leafy greens, dark chocolate, and your bhoo nimba, which is extremely good for the liver and for your skin and all of that. If you have too much of this bitter rasa, then you have vataja vikaras, and you have depletion of dhatus that happen. So you need to basically you need to incorporate all these six rasas in your food. You need to make sure that you have all these six rasas in your diet. And depending on the kind of prakriti you have, this is for a healthy person, depending on the kind of prakriti you have, you need to kind of play around with the rasas that you have. Like if I have if I'm a vata prakriti person, I need to watch out on the vata rasas, but that doesn't mean I stop having them. I must have the rasas too, but not too much of it. So I need to balance it out. Like if I make something with kashaya rasa, I need to balance it out. Like I need to add a madhura rasa, I need to add a little bit of salt, I need to add something like ghee or oil that would kind of balance out that vata guna in these rasas. So most of these nightshade vegetables, the rasa would be a combination. Like most of these, most of the things that you see, the rasa, there would be a combination of rasas, but the main rasa would be bitter, tikta rasa, and the nightshade vegetables. Okay, so now these are some of the properties of these six tastes. Like we've already seen some of the properties, these are just some more. So naturally sweet rasas would build tissues, would calm the nerves, and then apart from that, all the other things that I was talking about. So examples of these rasas, we'll see more examples. Sweet fruits like mango, bananas, pineapple, watermelon, carrot, corn, your dairy, grains, sweet vegetables like carrots, sweet potatoes, and so on. Now, some of these examples, like say for instance, pineapple and mango would also have a little bit of a sour taste. Would also, depending on how ripe the banana is, there would be a little, a combination of rasas that you have. So there's this one main rasa that you taste, like for instance the gooseberry, right, amlaki. The main rasa that you taste is that inherent taste of sourness that the fruit has. But after that, you have a secondary taste. Like you can then taste a little bit of sweetness, you can then taste a little bit of bitterness, a little bit of astringent taste, and all there are 5 tastes that amlaki has. So those are the secondary tastes. So that is something that you call anurasas, like the rasa that follows. Anu means something that follows. So the main rasa would be the first taste that you get, the predominant taste that you get. But then there are dravyas that have an aftertaste, that have a secondary taste also. And after the whole process of this digestion, after the whole process of you eating the food, tasting it and perceiving the taste and all of that, then there's an aftertaste that happens, which is part of your digestion. That's a completely different thing, right? So naturally salty taste cleanses tissues, increases absorption of minerals. So examples would be, sorry, I think these two are kind of interchanged. So salty would improve the taste of food. It'll enhance digestion. It'll lubricate the tissues. So examples would be seaweed, celery, mineral water, sea salt, rock salt, kelp, and so on. Apart from that, there are foods that are artificially salty, in the sense, you add salt to it to either preserve it or just to enhance the taste, like your chips, your nuts, your pickles, and all of that. Now, large amounts of those foods are not good for you. Like you have the habit of having chips every day. That's not good for you. That will increase your blood pressure and whatever. So in moderation, yeah, okay, if you're healthy and you can have it, fine, but not too much of food that has salt, which is added as a preservative. So naturally sour food would cleanse the tissues, would increase absorption of minerals. So examples of that would be sour fruits like your citrus fruits, oranges, lemon, lime, sour milk products like sour cream, sour yogurt, sour buttermilk that's made with sour yogurt, things that are fermented like wine, your pickles, vinegar, and so on. Pungent rasa would stimulate digestion and metabolism. So examples are cayenne pepper, chili peppers, garlic, onions, ginger, black pepper, and so on. Your kashaya rasa absorbs water, tightens the tissues, dries fat, it increases vata if you have too much of it. Examples are legumes, raw fruits, raw bananas, lentils, cranberries, pomegranate, and so on. And then bitter taste. Bitter detoxifies and lightens the tissues. Like I told you, the first thing that I associate bitter with this, with skin and skin problems, because most of the bitter herbs can be applied as well as taken in for skin problems. So examples would be kale, spinach, bitter gourd, green cabbage, turmeric, fenugreek. Most important thing is neem, a bitter herb, coffee, tea, bitter melon, so on, are examples of bitter rasa dravyas. So these rasas also have a connection with the kind of state that your mind is at. So normally, now there are two parts to this. What I'm going to talk about first is the kind of emotion that you have when you have this particular rasa. So basically, madhura rasa or sweet rasa, there's a lot of compassion, satisfaction, and overindulgence in that would lead to attachment. Now, this might actually seem very absurd because you have these rasas and emotions, and it might not really make sense. But the thing is, the whole reason that you even have this this slide on the presentation is because when a person comes to you, after you examine the physical doshas and after you're done with the whole physical state that the person's sharira is at, you then have the next thing, which is the manasika doshas that are present, because these manasika doshas also can create havoc to the physical state of dosha. So a person who has sweet rasa, there's a lot of compassion and satisfaction, which is the positive action of that particular rasa. If you have too much of that rasa, then that can lead to attachment. and that can lead to like possessiveness and things like that. Now, sour rasa. Sour rasa, the main prabhava, the main action is stimulation, and overindulgence of that can lead to passion, anger, envy, and so on. Salty rasa, the action would be increasing your confidence. Too much of it would lead to greed, over ambition, and so on. Bitter rasa, bitter rasa, basically there's the sense of isolation and dissatisfaction, and overindulgence in that would lead to grief and sorrow. Astringent rasa, you have this this whole hiding emotions, not really sharing your feelings, and basically bottling up everything, and too much of that will lead to insecurity and fear. Pungent rasa would lead is basically the main action is being bold and an extrovert, and be very outgoing, and overindulgence and that would lead to deceit and anger. Now, if you actually remember or recollect, when you start learning these doshas, and when you start learning this whole concept of of what increases the dosha and what decreases the dosha, you'll notice that apart from this physical apart from physical things, and apart from food, and apart from the kind of routine that you have, there'll even be these emotions that are mentioned, like too much of anger, too much of envy will lead to pitta dosha vikaras, would lead to an increase in pitta. Overthinking and analyzing too much, excess grief, excess fear, all that would lead to vata dosha. And over attachment, excess passion towards things, being greedy, being over ambitious, being very, all that would lead to an increase in your kapha dosha. So there is a connection between these emotions and the physical state that your body is at, and the doshas, both manasika as well as your sharirika, which means the sattva, rajas, and tamas dosha, which is your manasika doshas, as well as whatever your sharirika doshas are, both that gets affected based on the kind of emotions that you have. And it's just that these rasas also kind of play a role there. So for instance, depending on your mood, you crave for different things, right? Like if I have this like there are people who for instance, there are people who, when they're very low and when they're very depressed and they're very sad, they just want to have something that's sweet. They want ice creams, they want pastries, they want desserts, and so on. When they're, and sometimes when they're really angry and when they're really agitated, they just want something that's, like either junk, or they want something that's very salty, or they just basically eating based on the kind of mood you are in, right? So there's a connection between the kind of rasas you crave for, the kind of emotions that you have, and what these rasas even does to your emotions. So the effect of these rasas on the mind, if you basically have a vata mind, the most balancing rasas, it's the same thing, just the same thing that balances the dosha, the same rasas are going to play a part over here also. So sweet, sour, and salty rasas, what it would do is it would increase that compassion. It would make you very grounded. It would there would be fewer mood swings. There's a lot of confidence. You'll be able to keep a routine, and basically it kind of, because a vata person kind of wavers, and a vata person is just all over the place, is thinking too much, sorry, is analyzing too much. So these rasas will kind of have that grounding action on the kind of thoughts and the kind of emotions that you have. A pitta mind, the most balancing rasas would be sweet, bitter, and astringent. So that would kind of bring the sense of satisfaction, patience. There's less likely to be over busy, or whatever a pitta whatever the pitta dosha does to your mind kind of gets balanced out with these rasas. And a kapha person, the most balancing rasas would be pungent, bitter, and astringent. And this would kind of motivate the person to do a little more, reduce depression, kind of make the person a little more flexible, willing to change. Because kapha people actually have this tendency of getting depressed very easily. They kind of get lethargic, and they kind of their manas is a little more lazy. There's a lot of lassitude, and there's a lot of it's just like a sense of not wanting to do anything kind of creeps in faster for a kapha person. So if a person has a kapha mind, these rasas would actually make them more willing to change, a little more flexible, a little more motivated, because it's very difficult to make a kapha person follow your treatment. It's very difficult to get them to just listen to what you're saying and get them to follow it, right? So uh, according to Ayurveda, a balanced meal is something that has all these six rasas. So if you look at if you look at how Western nutrition works, you have you have all the different kinds of, you have carbs, you have proteins, you have fat, you have this percentage of all of that, right? But in Ayurveda, it's completely based on the rasas that you serve. Like I told you, when a balanced meal, you should have all the rasas. You should have all the six rasas. For a person who is healthy, even based on what kind of prakriti you have, you still don't leave out on any rasa. You still make sure that you incorporate the rasa into your diet. But if you have a condition wherein, as in if you have, say, for instance, diabetes, or if you suffer from hypertension, then you need to reduce or restrict rasas that would increase that particular dosha in you. So if a person has diabetes, then you don't give them madhura rasa at all. You cut down on the salt intake that they have. You cut down on the sour rasa that you have. But you completely restrict the sweet rasa, right? Another important thing that I want to tell you is, nowadays there are a lot of people who have who are on this pre-diabetic stage, where their HbA1c would indicate that they're pre-diabetic. So that just basically kind of so for people like that, you can help them out with a very good diet plan, just based on how you use these rasas effectively. So for people like that, uh, actually having fruits that have madhura rasa, which is like an indirect form of sugar, indirect form of sweet, wouldn't really harm them, as in, instead of directly having sugar or refined sugar or jaggery or licorice or something that's like very sweet and right there. And if you incorporate rasas that are astringent, that are pungent or bitter, that would actually help reduce this thing. And with exercise and with a proper schedule, they can reverse the pre-diabetic thing into a completely diabetic free lifestyle, right? So based on, like, most of these people who come to Ayurvedic doctors have already gone through tests and who have the blood work done and have all of that done. So even with whatever they've done, it's kind of easy to incorporate Ayurvedic nutrition, just plainly based on how you use these rasas that you've learned today. Yeah. So sattvic food. Now, this is something that, again, that when a person comes with a problem, like I remember when I was there for the camp that happened, at the temple that we had the camp at, there was this one gentleman who came, and he actually had all tridoshas were very high, and his main problem was that he was consuming too much of meat, just too much of meat. 3 times a day he was eating meat, and the reason he did that was because his wife didn't like cooking, and even though he didn't really enjoy it, he kind of, both of them are working, and this was something that he told me at the camp, and he said they've just been eating food from cans, or food that's completely processed, or frozen food. This is basically the kind of food that he was eating 3 times a day. Now, when you eat meat 3 times a day, there's absolutely nothing sattvic about the food that you eat. There's no prana in the food that you eat, right? There's just a lot of rajasika guna, and there's a lot of tamasika guna that you're eating. So now what that does is it affects both your manas as well as your sharira. So if you've noticed, people who consume only meat, there are people who don't have even a little bit of vegetable. There are people who have only meat. Those people, they have a very the kind, their mind is very different. They just have a lot of tamasika and rajasika gunas in them. In fact, I actually have a friend of ours who has this problem. He doesn't eat a single vegetable, and in fact, when he came to my house, I had to blend everything in the grinder so he wouldn't see the vegetables. I made a vegetarian curry, and I had to blend it in the blender so that he wouldn't see the vegetables, because if he saw vegetables, he won't eat it, and he'll just mix dal and whatever you blend, as long as he doesn't see it, and then he'll mix that with his rice or with his roti and he'll eat. But if he sees the vegetables, he won't eat, and he needs meat all the time. So in his family, they make either chicken or whatever just for him to eat, and this has been happening for a very long time. So when I tried talking to him about it, and I was telling him about what that could do to you, because there's nothing sattvic about the food, right? It's just tamasika and rajasika, and you're just basically you're just pumping yourself with with everything that's not healthy for you. So now what happened is, recently this boy, he went and got his blood work done, and he was highly diabetic. He's just 30 years old. He started off with secondary diabetes, but then now he started off with type 2 diabetes, which is just based on his obesity and whatever. But now he's diabetic. They had to start him on insulin. His cholesterol is just skyrocket high, and of course his fasting and his postprandial both are like somewhere there. His liver enzymes, his liver function tests were all haywire, and his just basically his state of mind also. There's just a lot of rajasika, tamasika. He's just unhealthy lifestyle, no exercise, and you're just basically eating the wrong kind of food. And you won't believe it. He stopped eating meat. He started working out for just 45 minutes every day. And in a span of 10 days, his blood report, it's just unbelievable. The level of how the level of sugar has come down, how his cholesterol has come down, how his liver function tests have come down. It's not normal yet. It will take time for it to get normal. But I'm saying with just 10 days of eating the right kind of food, and just with 10 days of exercise, 45 minutes of working out, that's what the right food and the right kind of routine does to your body. So what you need to have is food that is sattvic, because that brings clarity, that's light, easy to digest. Food has to be freshly prepared. Preparing food, putting it in the refrigerator, and then eating it a week later, or eating it continuously for a long time, it takes away all the prana from the food. You need to have food that is pure, that's filled with a lot of goodness. You need to have whole grains, pumpkins, ghee, milk, fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, and and the most important thing that all of us believe in is you make food with love and you serve food with love. That food kind of does to your body things that food that even top class chefs make don't do to your body. Food has to be prepared with love, served with love, and when you eat food, concentrate on the food, and like the food that you eat. That also plays an important role in how the food is absorbed into your body, right? So if you have food that has a lot of tamasika guna, has a lot of rajasika guna, that would just increase lethargy, would increase the vata, pitta, and kapha dosha, would lead to a lot of diseases and so on. So with that, I finished my presentation on the six rasas. Do you guys have any doubts in this? Is there something that didn't make sense to you, or is there anything at all that you would like to clarify? Any doubts? So, rasa in a tomato. So, tomato basically is a combination of rasas, like I was telling you earlier on. So, if the tomato is ripe, and if you've not kept it for like too long, if it's just fresh, then the tomato has a little bit of madura rasa, a little more of madura rasa, and it would even have a little bit of sour rasa. And then if you keep the tomato for a very long time, if the tomato is sour, then it has a little more of sour rasa, and less of other rasas. What is a good source to learn? I'm sorry, I can't help you with that because I have no idea about the internet sources for these foods. So I think Manjula ji would be a good person to help you with that. But apart from that, there are Ayurvedic references. Like there's a book called Dravya Guna Vijnaniyam, which kind of it's called Dravya Guna Vijnanam. So this book has all the Ayurvedic herbs that you use with the rasa, guna, virya, vipaka, the prabhava, what each herb does and the effect, the action, and so on. But that's again something that's it's like a complete guide to your thing. So that's the book that we all follow when we learn Ayurveda. Apart from that, I'm sure there are a lot of internet articles that are available, with easier food. Yeah. Actually, what I would suggest is if you should pick out herbs that are available, that are easily available in your local area, like your local produce, and then you start working with that. Because if you start reading that book, there are 5,000 herbs that are mentioned. It's impossible to remember them all. So start with your local produce, and that is what would that is the easiest way of learning it. Yeah. The online sources you have to ask Manjula Ji. Manjula Ji should help us with that because she somehow has access to everything. She'll know perfectly. She has actually shared these real wonderful articles on the group, and I've during the class, some of these articles which I don't know how she comes across, but they're just so beautiful, such lovely articles that she shares. I've learned so much after I met her. So she'll be the best person to help you guys with this. Any other doubts with respect to the class? If not, I'm done. Thank you guys. Thank you so much.